My presentation is not as fun as these two, I must warn you. Disclaimer. Yeah, I wish I was showing my work instead. It's more fun to talk about as opposed to talking about teaching performance art. I love teaching very much, but I don't enjoy talking about it so much. I'm Rabbya. I make art, teach art, write about art, eat, sleep, live art, yeah. And there isn't a very clear distinction between all of these, and that's what we're going to be talking about, and that's what was spoken about in the previous two presentations also. It's called Structures of Experience, because I'm going to be talking about structures that contain, define, regulate our everyday experiences and encounters. This is also a title I've borrowed from my own course that I teach to architecture students to talk about how architecture performs and how we perform in response. So what I'm going to do is I'm prepared to fail at doing this smoothly. I am going to do that. My practice, teaching, and the archive I'm making of performance art from Pakistan, and how they inform each other, and if it is performance art. And as I am doing it, the question that how do you define performance art? When you start archiving it, the material that you're collecting, what do you call it? Like, you have to come up with a definition of it to be able to decide what goes in it and what stays outside of it. And it would be a disservice to performance art to define it. So then how do you work with that? And how do you teach it when you don't want to define it, when you resist definitions yourself as an artist? What I do in these three areas, I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but that's just my method so far, is to focus on spatial relationships between the art object, the artist, the audience, viewer, participant, and the space. So we'll talk more about that. And my first encounter with performance art was without knowing what performance art is. So I was a student at the National College of Arts in Lahore, and we were taught very conventional art history back then, not anymore. Modernist art history, Western art history ended at Impressionism. You push it further, abstract expressionism. We were not taught about local modernist artists, no conversation about Shakir Ali, Zahurul Akhlaq whatsoever, but that's not the case anymore if they're listening to me right now. And I didn't know performance art, like I had never heard the term. And for my undergrad degree show, I had braked this oversized bread house. I knew that it was very important for me that I serve tea with this bread house to my audience, and I cut slices, and I serve it with butter and jam, and I'm there. My role as a server, my role as, all of that was very important for me. I was not aware that this is performance art. And one of the jurors, who was it? Khalil Chishti, who hailed from the US, and he was on my jury, and he kept asking me very important questions about my role. And I was like, no, this is an installation. But it isn't. So you see, the photo looks like it's of an installation, but it isn't. That's not what this work was about, but I don't have any documentation of me serving because I wasn't aware that that was important. I was looking at this as a sculpture, the mold, and the bread as a, later, I got to know after that jury. And I was very interested in this construct of the self through role-playing in the everyday, and I continued to work with that in my independent practice, in my collaboration with Hurmat. And then I landed in the US at the Art Institute to do my master's. And at the Art Institute, there's a whole department for performance art. And I, sadly, was in the art theory and criticism program. I wasn't doing an MFA. There's a performance art department, and I'm not doing an MFA. Oh, man. But anyways, I was able to audit classes, so on and so forth. And my interest in this performance of the self, which was prior to going to the US, was sort of, it multiplied because as a Pakistani Muslim living in the US temporarily, and as a Fulbright scholar where you have to present the best of your Pakistani self, you have to be just moderately traditional, but also liberal. Yeah, it was very, like you were an ambassador for the country. And so this whole idea of performing a self that is gendered, national, religion, et cetera, was informing my thesis, my dissertation. And so I started writing about performance art from Pakistan. It wasn't at that time a genre back home, like nobody, these works existed, of course. Like this is 1990. This is a television skit that Salima Hashmi did for PTV. Not in the realm of art for the TV, but so on and so forth. And so these works existed, but they were not spoken about or written about as performance art. There were video, there were photographs, this was strictly television. And so, without going into the details of it, these were the works I was writing about, because I was interested in this idea of performing the self-portrait. And this later became a curatorial project for Apex Art in 2017, but that's not relevant right now. And then I come back to Pakistan, because on Fulbright scholarship, you cannot extend your stay. They deport you. So you come back, and you're like, okay, I'm a Fulbright scholar. I'm the coolest thing in the world. And I'm going to change the art scene in Pakistan, and I'm come back to teach. So nobody knows performance art. They're all ignorant about performance art, and I'm the only person who knows about it. So you know that mentality, and I was like, I want to teach performance art. And they didn't let me. They're like, performance art? Like, who's, like, they knew it's happening out there in the world, like, right, this is 2010, it's the world of the internet. And, but they're like, who studies performance art? Like, you don't have to study performance art. Like, it's, yeah, no. And I was adamant. So you tell me not to do something, I will absolutely do that. You tell me to do it, I will not do that. So yeah, manufacturing fault. Anyways, so my method of teaching performance art, which was at that time need-based. I couldn't call it performance art. My students didn't know I was teaching performance art. The administration didn't know I was teaching performance art. I was the only person who knew I was teaching performance art. And I framed it as a cultural studies / anthropology, blah, 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 disciplines that I'm completely ignorant in. Like, I have no background in cultural studies or anthropology. But I've come back as a Fulbright scholar. Who cares? So I know everything. So I call this course Infraordinary. I must admit, I was feeling very cool to come up with such a cool name. Later, a student of mine told me that it's a book by somebody written in the 1970s or something like that. I didn't know. But yeah, so I designed this course, and we don't talk art in this course. How much time do I have? 7 minutes, okay. We don't talk art. We don't talk design. We don't talk architecture in this course. We examine our mundane, ordinary lives with a microscope. And the exercises are borrowed from creative writing exercises, theater exercises, games that we play as children and as adults, rules. I love rules. The title of the presentation is Structures of Experience. I'm a structuralist. So on and so forth. So this was me, this was my playground. I wasn't teaching performance art, but I was hoping that these things that I'm doing, examining our mundane everyday lives, which is basically examining the structures that contain us and our experiences, and how we encounter the everyday, experience it, converse with it, connect to it, and assign meaning. Basically semiotics, I was teaching that. And focusing on the relationship between form and content. How do you marry the two so that they become inseparable? And focus on the process as opposed to the product. So the goal was this. I'm so sorry about so much text on the slides because I don't have notes. This is for me to read, you don't have to read it. So the discourse on the everyday directs the students to the performativity inherent in the everyday. That's what my hope was, without talking about performance directly. And some of the students ended up employing it, so I was bingo. They started doing performance art. I don't have time to discuss the examples, which I would have loved to. These are some of the student works. Okay, so simultaneously, I started, Now performance art has become this really interesting, cool genre back home, and this is 2017, and everybody's doing performance art. And people who were previously not wanting to do performance art now want to do performance art. There's grants out there. There's residencies out there for performance art. It's a bandwagon. I'm sorry, I'm sounding, okay, I have 10 minutes. So everybody is now doing performance art. So now instead of just writing a dissertation where there were only a handful of works, I could make an archive because there was enough material. But as I started developing this archive, a lot of people were averse to the idea of calling themselves performance artists. But then the interesting thing happened that I got a fellowship at the Tate Museum. Nada was a curator at that time. I don't know where Nada is right now. Yeah, thanks to Nada that option was there to talk about performance art from Pakistan. And instantly artists started giving me their works because now my archive was legit. It was legitimized by the Tate Museum, although they don't know that, yeah, it's still on my laptop. I haven't been able to publish it or do anything with it. So the two things I was focusing on, actually I'm still working on it, is conversations with artists, curators, collectors about performance art. And the second thing is witness accounts for works of performance art that are included in the archive. Because when you say, so my question about how do I define performance art because I'm archiving it now, if anything, like the one thing that we all agree on is that it's experiential. But then whose experience are we talking about? The artist's experience, the curator's experience, blah, blah, blah. So I'm collecting 3 witness accounts, as it is in Islam, that you have to, yeah. So playing on that, I'm collecting at least 3 witness accounts for each one of the performances. And if I ever get to publish this as a book, I would really like to. Wink, wink. But if I ever get to publish this, the images from the performances won't be there. I would like to just have the witness accounts. But this, what you're seeing, there are 4 works here with witnesses explaining. This is a video I made for the Karachi Biennale because the title of the Karachi Biennale was Witness, and this was appropriate to show there. And some of these works people were not aware of. So I thought, yeah. Moving on. And Witness was interesting because people like Iqbal, not Jaffrey, but Jeffrey, which is a performative act in itself, had stories about his performances and no evidence by him, stories by him, and stories by other people about his performances. Him burning his work, him putting an envelope, him peeing outside some gallery in the UK, him putting an ad in a newspaper in the UK saying that I'm showing my work, but he is just claiming somebody else's work as his work, as a performance. Oh, by the way, in the Tate collection, I saw finally the letters that he's been sending to the UK government, filing a case against the Queen for the Kohinoor, which was stolen from us, and so on and so forth. So these are all performative gestures that he recently passed away. Anyways, and Rashid Arai, I was interviewing because of his performance works, and he had stories of performances he had done in the 70s in Karachi and no evidence. So Witness I don't think I have time to show an excerpt from the video, but just to mention that I'm not only including works where the artist is physically present and doing a live action in a gallery. I am also including works like this, which is about spatial relationships between the artist, the artwork, the space, and the audience. So this is a work by Aisha Jatoi, which is called Mirror, Mirror. You enter into the gallery from here. This is Rohtas Gallery in Lahore. And the story starts, and then you walk the perimeter of the gallery, and when the story ends, you're at the door again, you leave the gallery. So a work like this, which is performative, which makes the audience walk the parameter of the gallery and changes your relationship with the gallery space, is also included in the archive. My observations. How much time do I have? Okay. As I was talking to people, artists, curators, about performance art and about making this archive, there was lots of hesitation and, in fact, aversion to the idea of being called performance artists. Some of them didn't want to be included in the archive, and we had a long conversation about that. They don't want to be labeled as performance artists. And then another thing I noticed was that people who were doing performance art, before it was a taught discipline in the art institutes, for example, Indus Valley or NCA or BNU, they were making work which did not follow any institutionalized criteria for performance art. And now that it was a taught discipline, there was a criteria for what qualifies as performance art. So that was something that I observed. And then what do I call this archive? Like, do I call it performance art? Does the word performance art sit well? Because the moment I say the words performance art, people I'm talking to are like, no, but because it has a history which is geographically and sort of temporally located and so on and so forth, and they're not very comfortable, so what do I call it? And what is this naming business? And this naming and defining and all of that. We can't go into the details of that, but these works were essentially blurring that distinction between art and the everyday, like I was wanting to do that with the works of the students. And these were my interest in terms of defining performance art, because of course, my archive is biased. I am making it, and I'm the most self-obsessed woman you'll ever come across. So everything is about me. So the interest in the real versus the representational, which I want to focus a little bit on for our discussion later, is because I haven't settled this for myself, but I'm keeping theater and dance outside of it. And that's a very problematic stance to take, especially in the context of Pakistan and the Joka street theater and all of that, and which is very political. And why am I keeping that out? And then I should shut up. Do I have time to just talk about the last thing? Oh, okay. Wow, I'm impressed by myself. Anyways, so now an interesting thing happened. In 2022, they want me to teach performance art and call it precisely that. And now I no longer think that performance art, and I think that whole infraordinary business of teaching performance art that way is more appropriate in that context, where I'm not teaching them how to make performance art, but I'm teaching, like, performance art now, like Eva said yesterday, it's a methodology, it's a way of looking at art, it's a way of thinking about art, it's a way of thinking about spatial relations, and it's not just about performing live with a live body in a live space in front of a live audience, essentially. So I don't want to call it that, and then I give them one name and I send them a description and I keep the word performance out of it. And they're like, no, they resend it, like edit it again. So lots of back and forth, and we couldn't agree. And then luckily I got a PhD to go away, and I never taught that course. But yeah. So we'll leave the rest for discussion. Thank you very much.